All right, thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Lynette Jones and I am a certified grant writer with Great West Engineering. And joining me today is Jeremiah Fays, engineer with Great West Engineering. We are partnering with the DNRC Dam Safety Program for this workshop today. The focus of the webinar is grant and loan funding for dam and canal owners that are private entities. Before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of items that you can utilize in Zoom webinar. So if you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to see that there is an option for raising your hand, and there's also an option for chatting in the chat box. For this webinar today, we are taking questions in the chat box, and those questions will be answered by myself or Jeremiah as we can answer them. If there are questions that we cannot answer in the chat box or want to answer live, we will hold those questions until the very end and answer those for you at that time. The raise hand feature is an opportunity for you to ask any clarifying questions. So if there's something that I say that wasn't quite clear and you need additional information, please raise your hand and I can clarify that information for you. But if it is a question in general, then let's go ahead and put that in the chat box and we can do that at the end of the webinar. I'm also going to right now in the chat box, I'm going to put a link for some handouts that, well, maybe I'll do that in a little bit. It's not working. So I'll do that in a little bit. I will provide a link for some handouts. And if that does not work in this webinar, we will also provide those links to the dam safety program. And we'll go ahead and put those handouts on the website. All right. So today what we're going to cover is the private versus public ownership and why that matters. We're also going to talk about an opportunity for private entities to partnership with public entities and how that can help a project. We'll talk about the project type and why knowing your project type is beneficial in understanding the funding that is available. We'll look at a case study of a private entity that did a project, an irrigation project, that used private dollars, but also partnered with a public entity for some public money. And then we'll cover the two different kinds of grant opportunities, which are planning grants and construction grants. And at the end, we'll look at some current and upcoming opportunities. So the first thing that we want to look at is private owners versus public owners. Why does it matter and what is the difference? So with private owners, we're looking at water user associations, businesses, nonprofits, individuals. And with public owners, we're looking at cities, towns, counties, water and sewer districts, irrigation districts, conservation districts. And why this matters is that all grant funding has an eligible entities. And some of those eligible entities for grants are only private entities. Some of those are only public entities. There are a few grants that do fund both private and public entities. But as a private entity, there are limitations on how much grant funding is available to you because you're a private entity. But there are opportunities to partner with public entities to access a little bit more of that funding. And we're going to talk about all of that today. So one of the things that we talk about with private entities is there's always a conversation on, is a partnership more useful, or is it more useful to look at possibly becoming our own irrigation district or maybe our own water and sewer district? And Montana Code Annotated really does lay out what it looks like to become an irrigation district as well as a water and sewer district. The examples on the screen are examples of entities that have looked at this process and maybe also gone through this process, become legal irrigation districts. And this is the county water and sewer district, Montana Code Annotated, that kind of walks through how to become a water sewer district. Irrigation districts can become water and sewer districts, and understanding the difference between the two is necessary to understand what the benefits are for your particular group. But I leave that up to the attorneys that do this for a living. We're just trying to give a sense that there are projects, and especially if those projects are high in dollar amount, might have long-term loans, because the loans, when you're looking at loans for a project that has a higher dollar amount, you cannot partner with an entity for loans. And sometimes it's harder to get the higher dollar amount loan that you might need as a private entity. So these are reasons why you might consider becoming an irrigation district or a water or sewer district. And again, the examples here are of entities that have become water and sewer districts. We offer these entities as an opportunity for you to reach out to them if this is something that you're considering. So like I was saying, partnerships, partnering with a public entity will allow a private entity to utilize public dollars. And like I was saying, those public dollars, there's greater amounts available in the public dollars for the grants, and there's more opportunities for those grants. And so partnering with either conservation districts or counties are the most likely option for private entities to access some of these funds. As we start looking at these grants, the one thing to consider for your project is, what is your project type? A lot of times we look at a project and we might be saying, well, I need to replace lining in my canal, or I need to replace a diversion structure. And that's what needs to be done. But on a higher level, what are your project benefits? So every single project has a project benefit. If you're replacing the canal lining, you're most likely conserving some water. You're also managing a water resource, and you're also providing water for irrigation. So those are your higher level project benefits for that particular item. And so down here, I just have a list of some ideas. Does it benefit native fish or frogs? Does it provide municipal drinking water? Does it protect, conserve, develop, or manage a water resource? Does it provide wetland protection? Does it provide water for irrigation? Or does it provide recreation to the public? And these are just some of the items that you can narrow down. One of the things that we worked with the NRC Dam Safety Program on, we helped them kind of revamp their website to really be a source for groups to be able to understand funding and funding options. And so this is the main website for the Dam Safety Program. And this is a brand new website for them. And I'm going to have Chad with DNRC, who's with us today, just go ahead and share that link in the chat box. And one of the things that you can see here is this funding according to project type. There's also a funding guide. The funding according to project type is similar to the screen that I was just on in my PowerPoint. So you can click on one of these and you can see what opportunities. So maybe you're a dam or canal that provides water conservation, preservation, and recreational opportunities. And it shows you the grants and loans that you might be eligible for that might be a good fit. And it also shows you case studies that are similar to the project. These page numbers that are listed in here are page numbers to the funding guide that Great West worked on with the Dam Safety Program the funding guide to provide more information on this. So if you go back to the main page and you click on funding guide, this is the funding guide. And so those page numbers correspond with this guide. If you want one of these guides and you don't want to look at it digitally, you can get in touch with the Dam Safety Program office, and they would be more than happy to send you a copy of that. All right, let me move back over to my presentation. Okay. All right. So at this point, we're going to take a look at a case study that utilizes private dollars and also partnered with a conservation district for gaining some public dollars as well. And I'm going to turn this section over to Jeremiah.
Okay. Thank you, Lynette. as she mentioned, we're going to just kind of run through a quick case study here on how a private irrigation ditch company was able to do some private partnerships to be able to make some improvements on their infrastructure using a combination of grants. So this project is the Orchard Home Ditch Company. They've got some irrigation infrastructure that dates back to the early 1900s. Primary purpose was for irrigation in the Missoula Valley. Relatively small diversion and irrigation structure overall, although it serves several hundred homes. It's only a 7 CFS diversion off of the Clark Fork River, serving about 200 acres of irrigated land. Go ahead to the next slide. So some of the problems that they were faced with this irrigation infrastructure, overall age of the structure was a big thing. The intake was, the slide gates were in poor condition. The concrete quality, being over 60 years old, was in bad shape. The intake and return channel they had some issues with as well. And then the big thing on the Clark Fork River is they were getting a lot of debris and sediment catchment issues at the intake that was requiring quite a bit of maintenance overall. So the irrigation ditch company and their team looked at some different alternatives, and it was decided that they needed to replace the head gate, along with making some other improvements to ensure that they could deliver water that was, relatively low maintenance, take care of the debris sediment issues, and then just ensure a long-term viable project. So they looked at, or they replaced the head gauge. They actually put in a new flow gauge, new intake diversion structure along the Clark Fork, and then they also put in a log grate structure for a debris catch as well. The overall project was, I guess, relatively small for significant irrigation projects, but being small, overall irrigation company with limited users and acreage, the total project cost was $119,000, but that's something that would be a significant impact to the users based on irrigated land. Go ahead, next slide there. These are just a couple of photos of the completed project. The one on the top left, you can see those are the new slide gates and raceway coming into that overall structure. And then the one on the down on right is there. You can kind of see the work there in the diversion channel, and then the log grate at an angle. They've got a better angle to the river, so less sediment, the log grates and the debris catch, and then the new concrete intake to the slide gates there. So this project, the overall project funding, as I mentioned, it was $119,000 total project cost. So this is where the ditch company was creative in partnering with the Missoula Conservation District, and they submitted a DNRC renewable resource grant application on behalf of the ditch company, and they were successful in getting $100,000. At the time, that was the max amount they could get. Now those grants are up to $125,000, so they actually could have applied for full funding on the project, but they did get $100,000 in RRG grant for the project. And then the ditch company got an irrigation development grant for $12,000. And then they also got a private water grant for $5,000. So they were able to utilize DNRC funds through public and private grants and get the project fully funded. They did contribute what was estimated to be about $2,000, which was related to the project management and overall coordination of the grants to fully fund the project. So pretty low cash amount overall to the irrigators. I mean, 95+% of the project was grant funded. So even though it was a relatively small amount, it was a good use of that public-private partnership that Lynette mentioned to be able to implement this project at really no additional cost to the users there. And now I'll turn it back over to Lynette. She'll kind of talk about additional grants and loans and such that are available to private water users and irrigation folks.
Thanks, Jeremiah. So the first phase of a project is the planning phase of a project. There are a lot of grants out there, even for private entities, that do require some sort of additional analysis. So planning means that there's additional analysis that's needed to understand the problem or to understand how some of the solutions may or may not work. And most grants want to see that this additional analysis has been done so that entities are not just applying for a grant for an idea, but they're applying for a grant for something that they've looked into and they understand if it's feasible or not. So there are different options for private planning grants. I guess I should say there's one option for a private planning grant, and that grant is the DNRC Irrigation Development Grant. It's a $5,000 grant with a 25% match. The DNRC Irrigation Development Grants are available to entities that are going to develop new irrigation or sustain and increase the value of existing irrigation. And so that is an opportunity for putting some money towards a planning grant as a private entity. However, you can partner, as I was saying earlier, you can partner with a public entity to get some more planning dollars. There are conservation districts. There's 58 conservation districts in Montana. And their goal is to carry out programs that conserve soil and water, protect streams and rivers, improve soil health, improve wildlife habitat, and protect the health and safety of citizens. And so if your project seems like it's a good fit for a conservation district and you can get their support, they can agree to submit a conservation district planning grant for the private entity in an amount of $10,000. They can also agree to submit other public grants on your behalf. The other two public grants that offer planning dollars that are a possibility are the DNRC RRGL planning grant, which is up to $15,000, and maybe the MSEP planning grant, depending on the use of those funds, but those planning grants are up to $15,000. And I'd just like to refer you to, we did a public entity webinar yesterday, and that public entity webinar is posted on the Dam Safety Program website. So you can look at that to understand how those two public entity grants might work if you were in a partnership. When you're looking at planning, there's a level of planning that is conducted prior to moving forward. And you want to keep in mind that after planning, either if you have a full-fledged preliminary engineering report, or you're doing a feasibility study, or a technical memo or a technical narrative, there is just a level of planning that actually occurs. So in a feasibility study, you only have 10% analysis that you're looking at. So that additional analysis, we're looking at 10% of it. We're trying to understand if the project is feasible and what some of the feasible solutions might look like. And that's just a 10% overview of your project. And a preliminary engineering report, we're looking at 30% analysis of preliminary engineering. So we're also looking at the problem, we're looking at all the different alternatives and assessing which alternatives might be the best for your project. And that's a 30% analysis. And so when you are done with your planning effort and you're considering moving forward with implementing a project and kind of moving into that construction phase, you'll want just understand that in your construction grants, all of the construction grants that are offered, they do include preliminary engineering, that 70%, or maybe it's 90%, depending on what level of analysis you did. It also includes your final design, and it includes your engineering construction, which is the bidding, construction management, construction, and construction observation. And then of course, it does provide funds to actually construct the project. We say construction grants, but essentially it's covering engineering and construction for your project. So the construction phase of a project is the same as the planning phase. You'll want to just really assess what the benefits of your project are and look at those grant opportunities that might fit for you. And again, with construction grants, there is an opportunity to partner either with conservation districts and in other cases with counties. And I will be going through different private grants that are available and public grants that are available. And in each scenario, I'll talk about who your likely partners might be for those funds. One thing is a conservation district that supports your plan can agree to submit a conservation district construction grant for private entities, provided that there's at least a 50% match. And those grants are available to conservation districts for many different kinds of projects. And so there are opportunities to talk to conservation districts about that if it's a good fit. Okay, so some of the private construction grants that are available. The first one is the Fish Wildlife Parks Future Fisheries Grant. That grant is a maximum of about $100,000. That's just from looking at what they've funded in the past, but they often don't fund the $100,000 level. There are some that are funded at that level. So always kind of looking at what projects have been funded that might be similar to yours, and the kind of money that they received is always a good thing to look at, because Future Fisheries does not say that this is the max amount. It's kind of what I've looked at. They have never funded a project over 100,000. So that's just something to review when you're looking at grants. A 50% match is required. And the project type that's funded is growth, propagation, and protection of wild and native fish species. And the project must specifically have a connection to fish populations. And so if your project has a benefit to native fish, this might be a good entity to apply for and look at what's available through that grant. Next is the USDA. So Natural Resource Conservation Services EQIP grant. This grant is for irrigation management and water conservation. The funding is by county. It doesn't mean it's 4 counties, but they kind of split out the amount of the funding available by county. There are specific pools of money available. So with the EQIP grant, they have different initiatives that they look at every year. And so it's really important to look at their website and look at those initiatives and see what might fit and see what pool of money would be best to apply for. And a partnership with NRCS is required. And so when you're looking at a project with NRCS, they want to be a partner in the project. And it does kind of spell out on the website what that can look like. Again, I'm going to refer you to that funding guide that's available on the Dam Resource website. In the funding guide, there's more information about this grant opportunity, as well as the website, so that you can kind of look at these different specific pools of money that are available. The next grant is the Private Water Grant. Private Water Grant is a DNRC program, and that grant is for dam repairs and irrigation. And the dam repairs are, the focus would be dams that provide irrigation. And so the grant is up to $5,000 with a 25% match. This opportunity is available. It's open as long as there's funding available, and currently there is funding available. And again, more information about this project or this program is in the funding guide. And then we also have the DNRC Irrigation Development Grants. So DNRC Irrigation Development Grants, you have a planning grant that's up to $5,000. Then you also have a construction grant that's up to $20,000 with a 25% match. And again, the funding is to develop new irrigation and to sustain the value of existing irrigation. Oops, go back. Okay, so the public construction grants. So again, with public construction grants, this is an opportunity to look at partnerships and who would be the best partner in maybe trying to get some of the public funds if it makes sense for the project. We have the DNRC Renewable Resource Grant Program. It's a grant program that provides up to $125,000. And if you're a private entity that's applying, there is a 25% match that's required. That match actually comes from the Montana State or Montana Code Annotated for private entities. If the state is giving, working through a public partnership for a private entity has to give at least 25% match. And again, the project types that are funded are irrigation projects that conserve water. The Renewable Resource Grant Loan Program also will fund dams, and specifically dams that are connected to irrigation. So that's an opportunity for looking at that grant. A good partnership for those are counties, and also conservation districts are a good fit for that. Irrigation districts are a good fit if there's an irrigation district that's close by that might benefit from what you're doing, although that's probably rare. So conservation districts are probably more likely. And again, if you look at the public webinar that was that's been posted on the Dam Safety Program website, there's more information about how that grant process works and how the funding cycle for those funds work. The next public grant is the Conservation District Grant. And like I said earlier, that's up to $20,000 with no match, or over $20,000 with 50% match. And the projects have to demonstrate public and conservation efforts. It's pretty broad terms on what conservation district grants can fund. But again, it's looking at if your project fits the goals of the conservation district and if they're interested in supporting those goals and being a part of your project. The next one is the ARPA Irrigation Grant. So the ARPA Irrigation Grant is the American Rescue Plan Act. And those funds came out of the legislature, in the federal legislature, I should say, in probably spring of 2021. And then our state legislature has really worked hard to put together these funding packages to offer money for different types of projects. They recently, in September, just took out $10 million from the ARPA funds, and they're aiming it specifically at irrigation and agricultural irrigation projects. And so one of the things with our ARPA irrigation grants is that water user associations that are nonprofit entities are allowed to apply for ARPA irrigation grants without a public partnership. However, if you are not a public entity or a nonprofit water user association, then you would need to partner with a public entity. And for the ARPA irrigation grants, the best entity to partner with would be a county. So looking at partnering with your county would be a good resource. There's currently $10 million available for agricultural irrigation projects, and there's up to $500,000 that's available. So the maximum amount is $500,000. The application deadline is January 14th, and the application guidelines are available at the arpa.mt.gov. The draft guidelines were released in September. They took public comment, and currently DNRC is working with the ARPA Infrastructure Advisory Commission to clean up those draft guidelines, make them a final version of guidelines, and to release the application. I'm thinking that's going to come out in the next few weeks. And so if that's something that you're interested in, just keep checking that website, and the guidelines and the application should be available soon. So the next step for any project is funding the gap. When you're looking at funding a project, you're going to look at your grant resources and kind of try to put together what grants you're going to apply for and what might be good opportunities for getting those funds. And then the next step is looking at what you have left that you need to fund. And so funding that through private construction loans. So those private construction loans are the DNRC Private Water Grant. Those loans are up to $400,000. They provide funding for irrigation conservation efforts and irrigation dam repairs. The loans are often secured by either the applicant real estate or water rights. And in most cases, if you're looking at irrigation, they're going to be securing those by water rights. And then the next step, or the only other option for private construction loans are local banking institutions. So if there is a bank that's in your area that you work with often as irrigators or dam owners, it's always good to talk with them about your project and see if there's any funding available for that. They will also want to secure the loan with either real estate or water rights, but they can provide different options for irrigation and dam projects. I do list the public construction loans here only because I want you to understand that there is a little bit more funding that's available if you are a public entity. But again, you cannot partner for a loan. The loan cannot go through a partnership. It would have to be specifically from the private entity. But this is more in consideration on if you're looking at becoming a water and sewer district or an irrigation district. This is in consideration of that so that you can see the different options that are available. And some of the main ones are your DNRC RRGL loan program. Those are for publicly owned dam and irrigation infrastructure. And when you're a public entity, instead of having that secured by real estate or water rights, the loan is secured by user rates. So they look at what you charge for user rates and looking at increasing the user rates to pay for the loan on that project. And then InterCap, Montana Board of Investments, it's a good loan for either smaller projects or short-term projects, only because the interest varies depending on the length of the loan. And so if you have a short-term project of, I think it's like up to 3 years, it's 1.65%. But if you have a project that's 10 years or more, it's going to be 6%. And those loans, those interest rates do vary. So it's a variable long term. It's not as ideal as some of the other opportunities. And then again, if you are considering looking at becoming a public entity because you have a larger project, I would refer you again to the public webinar that's posted on the Dam Safety Program website. So private funding, current and upcoming funding opportunities. So just keep in mind that most private grants have an annual application cycle. So if you do miss, if you miss that cycle this year, you can plan on submitting the grant about the same time frame next year. And so that's always a good way to look forward. Some of these are coming up really quickly. And so you can always look at, well, maybe we can do this next year. The Future Fisheries Improvement Grant that I talked about is due November 15th and May 15th. So November 15th of 2021 or May 15th of 2022. They always have 2 funding cycles every year. They're always due in November and May. We also have our USDA NRCS EQIP grant, which I don't know if today is the 29th, might be. So it could be due today. But again, this is going to be an annual application cycle. It's going to be due most likely at the end of October of next year as well. The DNRC private water grant, it's an open application cycle. And like I said before, the funds are still available. And then we have the DNRC irrigation development grants. They accept applications quarterly. And I believe that they will be accepting applications in the near future. If you visit the Dam Safety Program website and look at the funding guide, you can find the contact information for the irrigation development grant and either call or email, I believe her name is Anne, to ask her when the next quarterly application cycle will open. So the public funding, current and upcoming opportunities, and some of these public funding are good for partnerships. So I'll mention those partnerships as I walk through this. But keep in mind, to be competitive with ARPA funding, at a minimum, the project needs to have a technical memo that is completed by an engineer in order to submit the grant. Without the technical memo, the project just will not rank. You can submit it. It doesn't require a technical memo, but you won't get the ranking that you desire, which means that you won't get the funding because you won't rank high enough. So just consider that you need to have time for an engineer to put together a technical memo, which is way less than a feasibility study, and it's way less than a preliminary engineering report. And then the MSEP and the RRGL grants require either a technical narrative or a preliminary engineering report. Those are much larger planning documents that do much larger analysis. It's usually about a 30% analysis and can take quite a few months to complete. So that's something that we want to keep in mind for planning purposes. And again, I talk about that whole cycle with planning and grant funding for MSEP and RRGL in the public webinar that's posted on the Dam Safety Program website. So what's coming up? We have the ARPA competitive grant that is due January 14th of 2022 and the ARPA agriculture irrigation grant due at the same time. For consideration purposes as a private entity, and especially since we're looking at dam and canal owners, and most likely these dams are for irrigation, you're going to be more competitive submitting an ARPA agriculture irrigation grant. You're going to rank higher in that application than in the competitive grant. And looking at the history of where this agriculture irrigation grant came from is that the Infrastructure Advisory Commission released funding for the competitive grant, I believe it was in May, and they were due July 15th. And that was the first round of that grant. And there were irrigators that submitted grants, but they were at the very bottom as far as ranking was concerned. And so the Advisory Commission wanted to ensure that irrigation projects were funded with some of this ARPA money. And so in September, they pulled out $10 million for the agriculture irrigation grant. And that's why you will be more competitive in that grant process. It doesn't offer as much funding. It's $500,000 is your max, where the competitive grant is $2 million. But again, you're going to be more competitive in the agriculture irrigation section. And again, just remember with the ARPA funds, the water user associations that are nonprofit entities can apply. But if you are not one of those and you're a private entity, you can partner with, it's more ideal to partner with the county on those funds. And then the next two are the Montana Coal Endowment Program, which is MSEP. It used to be called the Treasure State Endowment Program, TSEP. So MSEP, TSEP is what I like to say right now. Those applications are due May or June of 2022. This is also a good partnership with potentially with a county. Conservation District is a good partnership on this. But again, with these funds, and you can watch the public webinar, the MSEP, TSEP funds really are more focused on dams that provide drinking water. And if you are providing drinking water, you're likely a public entity, but it's just something to keep in mind. And then there's Montana DNRC Renewable Resource Grant and Loan Program that's going to be due May 15th of 2022. And these funds are a good fit to partner with a county or a conservation district looking at trying to receive some of these funds as well. Okay, so at this point, I would go ahead and take some questions. And I actually have a few that came in, so I'm just gonna look at those really quick and get those answered, and then we'll see if there's anything else out there. So the first question is the High Hazard Potential Dam Grant Program available to private dam owners? And so that grant program, we did cover in the public webinar. So if you're interested in that, you can look at that webinar as well. But in theory, the High Hazard Potential Dam Grant Program is available to private entities, but in practice it's not. And the reason why is because you do need a partnership. You do need to partner for the High Hazard Dam Program grant. And so the grant requirements for this program is that the sponsor must commit to a 50-year operation and maintenance for the dam, which is really difficult, if not legally impossible, for a sponsor to do. And so that's why, in theory, it's just not a good fit right now. However, at the federal level, there's an opportunity for a lot of more infrastructure money to end up in the High Hazard Dam Program for dams. And if that does occur, it's likely that these rules will change so that there's more of ability for private entities to look at accessing these funds. So that's something that the Dam Safety Program will continue to monitor. And one of the new features on their website is that they do have a news feed on their website now. And in that news feed, they will share information such as looking at this high hazard dam potential program and seeing if those rules are changing and the likelihood of private entities being able to access those funds. The second question is, what about using the USVR Water Smart program? I understand a private dam is eligible. That's correct. If private entities are eligible for this grant. The Water Smart program is a challenging program to fully understand the level of funding that they want to provide and what kind of projects they're looking at. So far, projects in Montana have not fared well with this particular program, and it's one that I'm not extremely familiar with. I think our group has written a couple of those grants, but we're just learning more about this program. But the application does take a lot of time and effort to put together. And so if you do decide to pursue this source, I also always suggest looking at other grants and putting in other grant opportunities as well, just in case that funding does not come through. Okay, do we have any other questions? You can either raise your hand or you can put it in the chat box if you do. All right, Jeremiah, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
No, not at this point in time. You did a great job, Lynette.
Great. All right, so this will be posted on the Dam Safety Program site, and they'll be sending out the link for this shortly. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And if you do have any questions, Jeremiah and I's contact information is on the slide. And then also the Dam Safety Program can also be contacted with questions, and also use their new website as a resource. That website is really handy. It specifically focuses on funding, and it's a really good way to look at how different projects can be funded. Thank you so much.